Scarcity versus abundance mindsets. In this episode, we are going to address the question, what is the difference between socialism and capitalism? I'm Doug Andrew. Get ready. I'm going to give you some insights into those differences and abundance, scarcity. You wouldn't believe how many people sort of buy into the scarcity mindset. So I'm Doug Andrew, and I've been a financial strategist for more than 45 years. But in helping people optimize their financial assets and minimize taxes, I help them understand opportunities that maybe they didn't know existed before. I write books. I've been fortunate to write 11 thus far. I'm working on my 12th one. I have a national radio show. We happen to be right here in my studio where I record a national show every single week that is broadcast throughout the country on various stations. I love to record videos. This is a YouTube video on the channel. And I want to address the question of what is the difference between socialism and capitalism, which is a very complex issue that I find a lot of people really don't understand, but there's some commonality between people who sort of buy into a scarcity mindset mentality versus an abundance mindset. But I also want to share with you some quotes that may help you understand the difference. So I first heard this quote from Dan Sullivan, the strategic coach. He coaches over 7,000 of the world's top entrepreneurs. And of course, most entrepreneurs believe in capitalism. When he said this, it really rang true to me. He said that socialism insists that the future pays for the past. Now, if you don't know what that means, generally speaking, when you hear people that promote socialism, it's generally that down the road, future, the taxes that our children and grandchildren will end up paying will compensate for the money we spend today to create fairness, to provide things for people, to try to create what in their idea is equality or fairness. The problem is that when you always insist that the future is going to pay for the past, or that you have to repair the past, the injustices that were created, oftentimes we get caught in this scarcity spiral. Now, Margaret Thatcher from the UK, she was pro-capitalism. She also said the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. Because generally socialism says that in order to provide all of these social benefits, whether it's health care for all or free college for all and all of this, they say, well, how are you going to fund this? Well, it's easy. You take from the people who have the money. So you take from the rich. Now, frankly, I've noticed that a lot of my clients that are multimillionaires and even billionaires, they actually pay 97% of all the taxes in America as it is. Many of them pay more than 40% in tax, where the average American pays less than 5%. And so they're already paying 8 times what most people pay, but people say, well, they can afford that. Well, on top of a 40% tax, many of them voluntarily give millions of dollars to charities. If you look at most capitalist tax returns, they are giving in charitable contributions to all kinds of causes that they believe in, and they feel like by giving it to those causes that sort of promote independence and so forth, it's a better use of their social dollars, so to speak, than just rolling over and paying more and more in tax and relying on government to spread it out and empowering people that you give it to instead of creating maybe a dole or a handout. In other words, they believe in giving a hand up instead of a handout. But as Margaret Thatcher said, pretty soon when you keep providing free stuff for so many people, you will run out of other people's money. And so that's the danger economically of buying into too much socialistic mindsets where we want to continue to raise taxes to provide or equality or fairness. So we have to be very careful. See, I'm very much for everybody having access to health care. But I believe that health is a responsibility, not a right. When you begin to argue that you have a right to health care, this creates a turmoil and chaos with the people maybe that chose healthy lifestyles when they are forced to pay for the unhealthy people. Because the unhealthy people made certain choices, but when they start saying, no, I want all of this assistance and health care, and I want you healthy people, because it's unfair you're healthy and I'm not. They don't realize maybe the healthy people paid a dear price, exercising, eating right and everything, to be healthy. But when you start getting into that mindset, hey, I want what you have. I envy your good health, and so I need help with my health, and you're going to pay for that. If you go too far, this creates all kinds of revolution in any country where that mindset takes over. So let me share with you the difference between abundance mindsets versus scarcity mindsets, and maybe you'll understand a little bit more about the danger of socialism versus capitalism. So one of my favorite mentors is Dan Sullivan, and he summarized this in a white paper that he called the Fairness Doctrine. And he said, unfortunately, a lot of people try to promote fairness, and they say, I want to create fairness or equality with society, but their hidden agenda is actually to create their own unfair advantage over other humans. Because many times the dictators or the leaders of socialistic nations or communistic nations, they are actually exercising authority and the power they want over other individuals, but they won't admit that. I mean, Hitler was always saying, oh, we're going to create the ultimate society, we're going to create fairness, but he was actually really trying to create his own unfair advantage over other human beings by creating the superior race. And people said, oh, that sounds wonderful, the ideal, that's the ideal society. So it begins with this scarcity spiral, and that begins with usually envy. Now, envy is where you want something, but it's real dangerous when you want something that somebody else has and you wish they didn't have it. So that starts in this scarcity spiral. Then that goes into this guilt of feeling like, well, golly, if I have more than this person has, and I should be feeling guilty about that. And people will say, yeah, you ought to feel guilty because life is unfair. How come you're healthy? How come you don't have problems? How come you have money? They don't worry about, well, wait a minute, what did you do? You took risks that other people chose not to take. And so you may have failed 20 times before you finally succeeded. But some people say, no, I don't want to take any of the risks, but I want all the rewards. And so sometimes that envy leads into the guilt and then the indignation where, oh, I am really upset about the success of other people. And so you begin to say that is totally unfair that people have success and not everybody can share in it. When actually, if you don't want to take the risk that Steve Jobs took to build Apple, you buy the products, and actually it's a super deal. I can get an iPad or an iPod. I'm very willing to pay several $100s for an iPhone rather than have that technology cost me thousands of dollars. But I could have taken some risk and invested in Apple stock. But when we start saying that's unfair, he didn't build that, we did by buying his products, therefore life's unfair. He should give a part of all of his profits back to everybody who made him successful. It's like, well, no, wait a minute here. Now we're maybe going a little bit too far. See, the scarcity mindset, if I were to describe it this way, if I just took an extra breath of air out of this room here, my studio, you may not feel offended that I took an extra breath of air out of the room because there's plenty of air. Or if you went swimming recently, oh, how many of you did that? Well, did you enjoy the water? Did you use all of it? No, because there's an abundance of water. But there are some people who get very upset if I share a success because then they feel like I took more than my fair share of the success because it's scarce. It's limited. If I'm happy, they're unhappy because I took more than my fair share of happiness. And this is a dangerous scarcity mindset. So it comes with this fairness doctrine. Life's unfair. We've got to level the playing field. We've got to make things fair. And so it's depleting the resources on the planet, and we've got to keep leveling the playing field. And so it comes up with this zero-sum mentality. We have got to create fairness, and they think that comes from taking from everybody who is succeeding and redistributing the wealth over and over and over again. And as has been proven, if you took everything away from the entrepreneurs, pretty soon, within 5 years, they would have a lot of resources again because they learn how to go out and be productive. But every time it's taken from them too much, because they will voluntarily give, they lose their incentive, and that's the zero-sum mentality. On the other side is the abundance mindset, or the abundance upward spiral. So let me share with you what that is. So under an abundance mindset, it starts out with a profound attitude of gratitude, always appreciating and being extremely grateful. Then you begin to use creativity, because when you have gratitude, you will begin to become creative. And as you use creativity to give other people new capability, they will no longer feel powerless. And so you actually then begin to cooperate. See, I like Steve Jobs developing the iPad, because I could purchase iPads for $400 or $500 and put my video library, 154 videos several years ago on one iPad. And then the results by cooperating were exponential. That creates exponential growth. And so by using cooperation, we actually have more abundance, and abundance breeds abundance. It fosters ingenuity about how to complement one another, and that creates bigger opportunities. That's what I want for my children and grandchildren, is more opportunities than they possibly have the capability to seize. That's a nice problem, and it's easy to solve by filtering which opportunities you're going to seize in life, which ones you're going to delegate to somebody else, and which ones you're going to walk away from. The key to this is cooperation. See, capitalism should have been named cooperation, but it was named capitalism by its enemies. Karl Marx, socialist. He said, that's unfair. You're capitalizing on people's needs and wants. Now, if I, back at the time of Christ, decided to cooperate with you, and I said, why don't you make the tunics, that's clothing, why don't you make the tunics this year and I'll make them next year? Well, if pretty soon you make the tunics better, cheaper, faster, better than I do, hey, you know what? I like to go fish. So you make the clothes and I'll fish. You buy my fish and I'll buy your clothes. You can charge more than it costs you to do that. I'm okay with you making a profit. You're okay with me making a profit. Now we're cooperating. And all of a sudden, this other gentleman, he likes to be in the dirt. He likes to grow corn. So now we cooperate and we buy his corn, he buys my fish, and we all buy her clothes, and now we're cooperating, and that is cooperation. It's not capitalizing on people's needs and wants. If somebody else comes in and makes clothes cheaper or better quality, I can choose in a free market to buy from them, because the market controls itself. When you capitalize on the opportunities, but you're cooperating, you're not capitalizing on people's needs and wants and creating unfairness. You're actually creating more fairness. So really, the difference here is ownership, creating fairness for all, but there is a counterfeit to that when people begin to say, no, we got to level the playing field. We need free this, free that. Let the government provide everything for you, instead of, no, why don't we be independent, because we declared independence in this country. And frankly, I'm concerned because sometimes the younger generation is now being trained to be more and more dependent on the government taking care of you from the cradle to the grave. And I personally think that's going the wrong direction. So if you want to learn more about responsibility and accountability, read my book, Entitlement Abolition. I'll buy the book. It's free. You pay $5.95 shipping and handling. Go to entitlementabolition.com. book.com, and I'll send out a free copy to you. And this book will help you understand this concept maybe a little bit better and be able to give you ideas on how to teach your kids, your grandkids, how to be responsible and accountable, and how to be captains of their own souls, able to handle any curveball life throws at them, self-reliant individuals.